And now we can call together the Arts and Culture Board for March 13th, 2025. The very first thing on our agenda is our City Council Liaisons Report.
Hi, I'm Joel, in case anyone doesn't remember or wasn't here last time. I am just really excited to hear about our presentation tonight. I don't have any particular updates for you, but I once again want to remind everyone, or I guess tell you, I am really trying my darndest to be open to communication from everybody. So if anyone ever wants to reach out to me or has a question, or particularly if you have suggestions for me, my wife to be involved and engaged, we love it. I will say, my wife immediately after the session, the last Arts and Culture Board, I went home and I let her know about the arts classes, the art classes that were going on at ACC, and she signed up for a few and has been loving those. So I think that is just a fantastic program. I was really happy that City Council and this board were able to kind of get those things rolling. So that's what I have. It's great to see everybody. Thank you.
Do you mind, and feel free to say
yeah.
no, what are you doing this weekend and how might that relate to arts and culture?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm still new. So this weekend, we are doing the City Council retreat, the annual retreat. So we'll be discussing broadly sort of like top level strategic plans that will include arts and culture. So I'm excited to get in there and talk about what we're going to be talking about. Oh, some of that will be about how we're going to finance some of these big projects. I think that's really, not to get into the nuts and bolts of it too much here, but we're going to be talking about the future of the town hall, how we're funding all of these things, what mechanisms specifically we're also going to use to fund them. So happy to talk about the nuts and bolts with anyone who wants to, but I don't want to get into it too much with everyone else's time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder. Of course.
Next up then, director's reports.
I'll just piggyback a little bit on what the council member just said. We have the retreat with City Council this weekend. Friday, they're going to be hard at it, looking at a variety of topics, mostly finance related, it sounds like. So bring your calculator.
Yeah.
And then Saturday, it's going to be really a deep dive into council's work plan. And that certainly includes arts and culture. The big item that we'll have to talk about, that Dennis and I will be chatting with them about, will be the arts and cultures master plan, and now called the strategic plan, the community strategic plan that we'll be looking at this evening. But I think it's going to be a great opportunity to get some face time with City Council, talk about the priorities that they have given us direction on already, and get some additional direction. So looking forward to spending some time with council.
Likewise.
As am I. I'll be there on Saturday as well. For now, just a brief plug, we are in March, and March is our month-long series of One Book, One Littleton programs and activities focused around Ralph Moody's Little Britches, which is, for those who are not aware, an example of local history and literature. So we invite you to partake in any of the activities that we have going on. Feel free to stop by our gallery, which is currently showing an exhibit of photographs and historical documents from Ralph Moody's era of Littleton, made possible thanks to partnership with the museum, and a lot of other fun things going on.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is public comment. Ms. Chadbourne, I believe you signed up when you walked in, so if you'd like.
My name is Pam Chadbourne, and I live in the downtown area. I'm grateful tonight that you folks have a historic presentation, historic preservation presentation. You know that I've been talking about this for a couple of years, and so I'm glad that it's appearing. I want to mention that another thing I've talked about is the storyteller program that Denver has. And so a lot of historic preservation has to do with stories. It engages people and pulls people in because these old buildings actually have stories behind them and people love them. And so recording some of these stories while we still have people around who know mid-century modern Littleton and would be a good tie-in with arts and culture. And arts and culture could probably use other stories as well for artists and folks like that. I'm going to mention a proposal that was made at the Historic Preservation Board. Had an applicant coming in, and theoretically the way our staff read the code, they said, Well, you can't have a blank brick wall. You've got to put a mural there. Murals are not authentic to the 1890s. They're not there and they don't belong downtown. We need you to get engaged and to support this kind of thing. Murals don't belong everywhere all the time. And we need you to know this and not to push for murals in the wrong place, which would destroy historic character. So anyway, that's an example of, maybe next steps after this. I want to talk about Geneva Village as well. Geneva Village's story is that it was designed by Eugene Sternberg. He was an architect who came from Europe before the Second World War and was able to practice his craft in Littleton. And he's called the father of Littleton because among his other accomplishments are ACC and Heritage High School. But Geneva Village is residential, affordable housing accomplishment of its time. It is very quiet in what it achieves. It has these large windows in a natural space, which was very intentional. He had a tree plant. In Geneva Village, in his story, let me say the brutalist is about a mid-century modern architect who came from Europe and was in American practice and then was treated brutally by America. And I see the city of Littleton, by destroying Geneva Village, as doing that same thing to our European architect. We really have that story and we're throwing it away. Arts and culture, folks, care about historic preservation, please. It is part of the sense of place, the story of Littleton, which is what arts and culture is, the bones of it. So I want us to make a last minute pitch to preserve Geneva Village and historic preservation in general. We've got to expand the mid-century modern along Littleton Boulevard. So please think about that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm not seeing any other members of the public here, so I'm going to close that session. And since our presenter is not yet back, Anna, can I turn it over to you for the next part of our agenda, which is project updates?
Sure, yeah, it will be pretty short and sweet.
Please feel free to filibuster. It's either you or me.
Well,
so-
in that case, since I've been given permission.
Yeah.
Let's let Anna go.
I think as I mentioned at our February board meeting, we got a fair amount of interest in our mural application for this year's funding. I won't be bringing that up again until I think the April board meeting. And at that point, we still have, it's the Public Art Subcommittee that's going to be taking a look at the final designs before that comes back to this full body. But I will keep you updated as that progresses. Lodgers tax grants, as you know, are open. It's kind of crazy. They opened February 28th and they're open for another month or so. Closes April 11th, it's Friday. So believe it or not, that time has arrived yet again this year and we've already received a handful of applications. Yeah, Jenny and I are both, we have an over-under. Maybe we're thinking there's gonna be a lot this year, so prepare yourselves. And also if you need more like postcards or promotional material, I have a bunch of it in my office and I would love to get that out in the community as much as we can. So if there are people in your circles who you think would benefit from applying, please send them our way. State of the Arts is also coming up soon, April 2nd. It's a Wednesday, 5:30 to 7:30 here at the museum. If you are free that evening and have not yet RSVP'd, please do so. It's a really wonderful opportunity to connect, to network, to learn more about the economic impact of arts and culture in our community. And we have been working hard to make that a really fun and unique event. We're gonna have some dancers perform too from Selma, Colorado, previous grant recipient. We'll have our Arts and Culture Award, our second annual Arts and Culture Award presented. And actually, I'm not sure if that's been shared widely. Well, Cindy Hathaway, of course, but I don't think that's been shared out on any city channels, so we'll make sure.
Yet.
Yeah, she is thrilled to have received this honor and is bringing a whole contingent from Western Welcome Week to celebrate. So Really great. And then finally, our next quarterly Culture and Arts Partners Group, CAP group meeting is May 21st. It's a breakfast meeting. It's 8 to 10 a.m. I know that's hard for folks to work, but if you are free and able to come, I would recommend you come by. It's going to be at the ACC Colorado Gallery. They're in the main campus annex. So we'll start there. We'll have breakfast. We'll have like a networking hour, and then we're gonna walk over to the Arts and Design Center. It's about a 5-minute walk. Hopefully the weather will be nice. And we're gonna get a tour of that space, which is actually it's incredible. Jenny and I saw it in December and got a personal tour. It was great. That's it for me. I'm sorry, I could go on for a long time, JD.
You know, it could be said that Cindy's bringing a parade.
A parade.
Yeah. One thing to put on your calendars, I know it's well in advance, but annual city calendar contest is open. For those of you who know budding photographers or professional photographers who want to participate in it, you can find it on the you can email me at arts@littletongov.org, or you can go to the communications department, and they have all the information that you need for the application process. But Monday, September 29th will be the judging of the calendar contest, and that is open to the entire board to attend that. So if you are interested, please let us know. I don't have a time yet, but it's usually in the evening. Dinners provided. Bye.
I just wanted to say that was a really fun time, so it's definitely worth your time to do,
Oh, thank
if you're
you.
interested.
It
I did it
was.
last year, it was great.
So take it from Noah. Absolutely. And that's it.
Any other questions on any of those updates? Okay. Then I will, Sarah, are you ready?
Yep, just connecting.
Very good.
Should be here soon.
Anna, do you want to introduce Sarah?
Sure. We have, in our tradition of doing presentations at our weekly or our monthly board meeting, kind of an educational component, we have Sarah Dusenberry from the Community Development Department. She is our senior planner with the city of Littleton and has very graciously offered to come and present on the history of our mid-century modern architecture on Littleton Boulevard, as you'll see. Yeah. Very happy to have you. Thank you for coming on a weeknight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. So as Donna mentioned, we're talking about West Littleton Boulevard, and we'll be looking at a little bit of the developmental history as well as a lot of the architectural history and explanation of the styles that are along the corridor, as well as some of the preservation efforts, both past and upcoming. So we get started looking at some of our history. So in 1867, a partnership between John G. Lilly and Richard Little opened the Rough and Ready Mill. By this time, people had already begun settling in the area. In about 1964, there was actually a school noted. And one of the kind of big things outside of kind of starting a major business brought rail to Littleton, which has kind of within its kind of developmental history has helped it kind of become economically viable and kind of retain. So a lot of the kind of transportation element is going to be a key factor for Littleton. In 1872, the city was founded by Richard Little, and then later incorporated in 1890. At this time, most of the development was concentrated in kind of the downtown area, with businesses surrounded by residential properties, with schools, and churches, with the kind of outskirts being a little bit more agriculture and manufacturing focused. Now, there was some residential development starting kind of on the westernmost portion of West Littleton Boulevard at this time. In 1902, the city became the county seat, which prompted the construction of the courthouse in 1907. It was designed by Denver architect John J. Huddard, and was really kind of the first major building built on kind of this side of Littleton Boulevard, or this side of town. And so, as I mentioned, had that residential kind of concentration of properties, with the rest of it kind of being agriculture. The next major kind of building being built is First Presbyterian Church. This is not in the mid-century style, but is rather a neo-Gothic style, designed by Jacques Benedict, which was also a local architect and is known for doing the Carnegie Library, currently the Melting Pot, and then Littleton Town Hall. The next kind of major kind of point leading up to Littleton Boulevard is that in 1940, Littleton Boulevard was officially paved. At this time, it was still a relatively kind of country road that was dotted with houses and churches on the west end, and then more predominantly agriculture and ranches as we move more towards the east. Bringing us up kind of to Littleton Boulevard's developmental state kind of starting, the post-war kind of suburban boom and car boom is really what made a lot of Littleton Boulevard kind of happen. And really our connection to Denver via the railroad, as well as eventually Highway 85 or Santa Fe, really helped kind of transform the city from a small town based in agriculture and manufacturing to really major suburb in the region. And through this really started to essentially change the character of the town overall. The first major development along Littleton Boulevard that really started gearing it towards this kind of commercial corridor that it is was the Woodlawn Shopping Center, which was built in 1955. An interesting kind of story about this one is actually the city threatened to withhold water service if they did not annex into the city. Much of this, at this time, much of this land was unincorporated Arapahoe County. And so Woodlawn Shopping Center was the kind of first major commercial corridor or development along the corridor, and also one of the first major kind of annexations into the city. In 1957, due to the car boom, at this point in time, most households had 2 cars, actually prompted the road to be widened to what it is currently today, the 2 lanes in both ways with the center median. As I mentioned, through the 1950s and 1960s, the city continued to kind of annex land across the board, but also kind of predominantly through Littleton Boulevard to what is now kind of the eastern boundary just past South Broadway. And so this connection, as I mentioned, to Denver via the railroad as well as the highway really allowed Littleton to kind of take advantage of those changing kind of economic trends, suburban trends, which led major national corporations to start to want to locate suburbs is kind of where they were developing. Littleton was a stronger suburb. And due to kind of Cold War era, there was a lot of kind of defense contracts, which prompted a lot of new kind of corporations to headquarter in the region, and specifically Littleton. And these businesses, and I'll get into this a little bit further, is really the impetus for this mid-century modern, this modernist style along the corridor. And then what really brought about the kind of end or kind of downturn of Littleton Boulevard was really the oil boom and bust. It prompted a lot of development. That development happened elsewhere in the city, predominantly southern and western portions. And so by the kind of mid 1980s, really saw the decline of Littleton Boulevard. So looking kind of broadly at architectural history, as I mentioned, modernism kind of as an umbrella term was really booming in the States between 1950s to 1990s. This style did start in Europe late 19th century into the 20th century, and increase of use of this style came with the post-war because many scientists, scholars, architects fled Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany also heavily denounced the use of modern architecture. They focused more on a neoclassical kind of style. And so the modern architecture aesthetic really looked at kind of turning its back on a lot of the decorative nature that kind of previously European architecture kind of had. In the US, the early 20th century, we had a lot of the revival styles, or things like neoclassical, had a lot more ornamentation. But with this shift, kind of post-war, really started to kind of move away from those kind of decorative elements of European architecture. And for your kind of high status buildings, this style really started to be chosen for things like public buildings, your corporate headquarters, even luxury residences. Remember, at this time, a lot of residences were that kind of model home style subdivision. And so those kind of mid-century modern houses that you see, similar to say like Arapahoe Hills, are really considered your a little bit more luxury type residences. And so, as I mentioned, the kind of businesses that were coming in really prompted the use of this style. It was kind of noted that you're kind of educated, you're intellectuals, you are kind of professional skilled laborers really valued this style. And because it started to kind of be seen as conveying that sophistication, modernity, forward looking, Same thing similarly for your kind of other commercial retails, restaurants, et cetera. They took a slightly more ostentatious approach to it in the sense that they are wanting to catch people's eye and bring them into their businesses. But again, really focused on that kind of forward looking. There was a lot of that forward looking kind of optimism post-war, and this style was thought to kind of emulate that. So kind of specifically with Littleton, as I mentioned, pre-1950s, this area was predominantly farms and ranches. Now, these did exist through the 1950s, and there's still some, at least one property kind of extant still on the corridor. And actually, a city council member apparently was noted as stating that they would see horses tied up in front of businesses because it was still such a mix at this period. And as I mentioned, that development, original residential development that was concentrated along the west end, those started to be turned and converted into into businesses. No longer residences, those ones that were fronting along the street. And this went so far as to even include buildings that were built in the early 1950s. Those residences that were still being built up to this time often were actually converted into commercial structures as well. And it's really indicative of just how quickly the character of Littleton Boulevard was changing in this period. And I bring up Woodlawn Shopping Center again as being that kind of major impetus for the kind of start and evolution of Littleton Boulevard. But it was really that exemplification of shifting economics, and especially away from downtown, which was our original commercial core, and that kind of shift to focus on new modern amenities, businesses, the use of the car. Woodlawn Shopping Center, a lot of parking lot, big focus on the automobile. And this really affected downtown, which prompted them to start trying to modernize, coming up with different ideas for that. Some of them that were kind of thrown about was painting the buildings all the same color and providing continuous awnings. One, Eugene Sternberg, which is a kind of a well-known architect in town, actually proposed kind of creating an open air mall, getting rid of the streets through downtown and making it kind of a landscaped corridor. And then also one went so far as to say, let's scrape it and rebuild. What ended up occurring is actually kind of seen in this picture, which is they added cast concrete canopies that had trees and planters then in between. It was starting to kind of mimic some of the coverage of kind of walking in pathways, making it a little bit more comfortable. These were constructed in 1967 and then were removed in 1986. So getting a little bit more into kind of the specific of the various styles. So these are the kind of 9 styles that were noted in context study, and I will get into this study a little bit. A lot of this information is from this. This is kind of setting up how important these studies are. But here are kind of 9 styles. I will say fantasy modern, I think, is one that was kind of coined for this study, or at least by the folks who wrote the study. So it's not necessarily you're gonna see it pop up as a common modern architecture style. But looking first with brutalism, so I'll kind of go through each style and kind of give a few of the characteristics and then just highlight a couple of little things. So for the brutalist style, really focused on horizontality, robust, really overscaled proportions, often deeply recessed windows, had really thick vertical kind of emphasis and piers, often didn't have eaves on the roofs, often had flat roofs and used things like concrete, and even corten steel. And so this first one is done by Eugene Sternberg. It is a sketch of one that was built in 1974. It's the Martin Miller Law Offices. And as you can see, again, really heavy set kind of building, focus on horizontality, use of concrete. Next one is ABR Partnership Architects. It was built in 1972, and it's originally Littleton National Bank. Again, you can even see here those kind of recessed windows, that horizontality, the kind of oversized, kind of heavy nature of the structure. Looking at commercial modern, again, horizontally oriented. A lot of modern styles have that kind of horizontal focus to them, so I'll be repeating that quite a bit. A little bit more rectangular in form, really focus on the front facade. Not a ton of ornament, often don't have eaves. We'll have both eaves or larger eaveless or overhanging eaves, and then often flat or shed roofs. This first one, you can see that kind of angled shed roof. It was designed by Colin Stewart, 1964, and it was originally the Mr. Steak restaurant. And as I mentioned, kind of that front glazing, that shed roof, a little bit more simpler in form rectilinear. And then the next one, don't know who the architect is, but it was built in 1961. Sorry, that is not quite right. No, sorry. This is the Littleton office building built in 1960. Apologies. And so again, that front glazing emphasis, very rectilinear form, a little bit larger. The commercial modern, I think, was more often used on these kind of smaller shops, but sometimes was used for offices. So expressionist. Apologies, this one is actually the Mr. Steak restaurant. And so this one looked a little bit more at sculptural forms, a little bit more non-traditional in its structural elements, often used cast in place concrete, used kind of cantilevered elements, and unconventional roof forms or designs, and often kind of saw roof as continuations of the walls. So this one, Colin Stewart, 1964, originally Mr. Steak restaurant, kind of interesting irregular form of the kind of canopies kind of coming out of the wall, those large overhangs. The next one, this is an unknown architect. It was Rich's Charco Burgers restaurant, built in 1961. Again, kind of unique expression with the screening there along the front, as well as then you kind of see the rafters kind of coming out, and it's this continuation. Again, both have relatively low rectilinear forms. So fantasy modern, this is the one that's a little odd. And so it's really noted as kind of this almost cartoon-like parody of historic styles. And really wanting to reflect kind of a nostalgic theme, often distorted scale in its form, had things like oversized windows, light fixtures, chimneys, often brightly colored, and then a range of roof types that again reflecting kind of those specific historic styles that they're starting to kind of build off of. So this first one, architect is unknown on both of these, built in 1965. It was originally the International House of Pancakes. And as you can see, really exaggerating that roof form, that front gable that was often seen in a lot more kind of previous styles, a little bit more decoration, and just kind of futzing with the scale a bit on this one. And then the next one was originally a Taco Bell, built in 1974. Again, kind of referencing kind of Southwestern style, but doing it in a slightly more unique way, different use of material, kind of emphasis on, again, that kind of front, larger windows there. Looking at our formalist styles, and one of the things that if you kind of are starting to pick up on, modernism is a relatively large umbrella. It has some clear kind of tenets across the board, but still a fair amount of variation in what architects were creating at the time. And so for the formalist, this one is actually going to be a lot more vertically oriented in how it kind of expresses features. There's a lot more focus on the corners of buildings, often used recessed windows, vertical piers, and often had flat roofs. And so this first top one was built in 1973. The architect is unknown. It was the Dawson and Company Realty office. And as you can see, it's a little bit simpler, but really focusing that verticality and emphasizing the kind of height of the building, the entrance kind of noted at the corner, that decoration kind of at the corner. The next one is the Mountain States Telegraph and Telephone building built in 1968. This one even more so really emphasizes that verticality. And kind of shift in style, and also that kind of corner entrance, but still overall relatively simple forms of the buildings. Looking at the international style, this one is kind of going back to that horizontality, use of more ribbon windows, a strong expression of the windows, a lot of glazing. And then kind of a slight shift is the use of industrial materials, so things like metal, aluminum, concrete. Not as much ornamentation, and then often used cantilever and flat roofs. Now I will say, obviously this one has a large kind of on the bottom, a large screen, kind of decorative. It did provide a function in terms of screening light, But one thing you will notice is not all of these buildings fit 100% into the style. There is some variation, even though you can still say that it is still specifically this style. So that one on the bottom specifically was the Littleton Savings and Loan Association, built in 1959 by Joseph and Louise Marlowe. And again, large amount of glazing on that front, kind of repetition of windows on the side, and then that use of aluminum and that metal, kind of part of the style, kind of international style, fairly simple. The top one is done by Richard Crowther in 1966 and was originally the Littleton Clinic. Again, focus on glazing, large amount of glazing used as almost kind of a decorative feature, the use of concrete as well, and then also very horizontal in nature feeling. Even those windows are vertical, the overall kind of heavier forms tend to be more horizontal. So looking at our late modern style, again, a little bit more horizontal, often used hooded or really deep set windows, use of, again, your more industrial materials, less ornamentation, often don't have eaves, and then decorative use is more kind of functional features, and then kind of flat roofs. And so this first one is built in 1974, it's a Littleton Industrial Bank. And as you can see, really those horizontal windows, a fairly heavy building, really utilizing the kind of use of kind of wanting a covered door as almost a element of interest for it. And then the one on the bottom here is the United Bank of Littleton, built in 1972. This one especially has those recessed windows that were fairly horizontal with a lot of glazing. The kind of structural elements of the building are used to kind of as those decorative elements. So this next one, and second to last, is the rustic modern style. This one is a little bit more mixed in its use of kind of horizontal and vertical forms, often used kind of more horizontal windows or even kind of vertical slit windows, so just smaller, more vertical windows. Often use more traditional materials like brick, stone, and shingles, which I think are seen on, all of them are seen on both of them. And not a ton of ornamentation. The materials are a little bit more used as that ornamentation. The roof is a really prominent design feature and was kind of a mix of shed roofs, gables, and hip roofs. So this first one was originally the Hasty House Restaurant, was built in 1964. And again, kind of focused a little bit more on that horizontal kind of point of it. Again, the roof is really the kind of major design feature of this building. The next one was done by Eugene Sternberg in 1967. It was originally the Brock's Eating House Restaurant. Again, really a large focus on the roof, really stark angle and emphasis, and then that kind of interesting use of material. And then this one really has, I think, a mix of that horizontal and kind of vertical nature. As you can see, the kind of back portion becomes more horizontal with that kind of front dominance of the side gable roof there. So the last one being the Usonian style. This is probably one of the more kind of heavily influenced by architects in the US, as it was kind of created by Frank Lloyd Wright, which is probably one of the more well-known American architects. This one is also very horizontal in orientation, use of kind of ribbon windows, corner windows, and then more traditional materials as well. And kind of had a little bit more innovative use of traditional forms. So kind of using these traditional forms slightly differently, use kind of geometric features more as ornamentation, often had overhanging eaves, and then had flat gabled and sometimes structural roofs. And so this first one, being a little bit larger and heavier, but still has that kind of horizontal nature to the windows along the top there. And that one is by Rene Chirzaneau. Not great at French, built in 1974, and it was originally the Francam Realty and Insurance Building. The one on the bottom, the architect is unknown, but it was originally the Woodlawn Clinic, built in 1960. And here you can see that kind of use of overhanging eaves, the kind of structural features coming out and kind of being part of that decoration. And though the windows are vertical, kind of still having some of that kind of horizontal feel and kind of how they're set up in repetition. Yep, so now I'm gonna talk a little bit, last couple slides, on just kind of some of the preservation efforts that have been going on with Littleton Boulevard. A lot of the kind of celebration and support for Littleton Boulevard really started with Historic Littleton, Inc., which is our kind of local historic preservation nonprofit. And really in the early 2000s, really started to celebrate and bring kind of interest and kind of support for these resources, recognizing how important and unique these are. And so this support over about a decade or so really started then led to the entire Littleton Boulevard being placed on the 2014 Colorado's Most Endangered Places list. This is something that's done every year by Colorado Preservation Inc., which is essentially a historic preservation nonprofit, a statewide nonprofit. And really this kind of statewide recognition and kind of eye on it prompted the city in 2016 to apply for a state historical fund grant through History Colorado, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, to fund a context study for Littleton Boulevard, or survey and context study. This was completed in 2018, known as Commercial Modernism in the Greater West Littleton Boulevard Corridor from 1950 to 1980. Not the most exciting title, pretty interesting history. I do recommend finding it. It is online. It's a lovely blue book. As I mentioned, a lot of this information tonight was kind of drawn directly from this study. These types of studies are really helpful in understanding the resources that we may have, the history, the developmental history, the context of what was going on. And then this one even went so far as to kind of start to outline all of those specific styles and how they apply. And so one of the big things for this is that it did survey the buildings along the corridor and some of those in the vicinity, and noted about 77 different buildings that are kind of in this area and along the corridor, and really noted them for their history, the significance and integrity of the buildings. And so they were evaluated and ranked and put into different tiers. This is a little bit more of a unique kind of way of looking at things. A lot of times studies will say you should designate or not designate. So it doesn't provide as much useful information, essentially, or kind of, especially with Littleton Boulevard, these resources are spread out along the course of it. You notice with kind of downtown, it has a strong concentration of these buildings. Littleton Heights, another one of our historic districts, is a single block. And so this kind of presents a unique situation for Littleton Boulevard that really utilizes these tiers to kind of say, tier one is going to be your highest level of both historic and architectural significance. A lot of them often have an architect associated with them, really clear examples of the styles, and also still maintaining what we call historic integrity, which kind of looks at a variety of different aspects. But it's the simplest way I've heard it explained to me is someone who was there at the time that the building was built, or say who built the building, if they can look at the building and still see that it was what it was, that it was there. So it doesn't mean that changes can occur, but that overall the building still kind of reflects the character of what it was originally. And so tier two, you started to have not quite as high a level of that kind of historic and architectural significance, may not know the architects quite as much, but we're still really exemplary of the style, and especially how we kind of handled it on a local level. And a lot of these buildings may kind of be good examples or kind of potential for state and local designation. So may not rise to necessarily the level of kind of a national designation, but does still hold a lot of local and state significance. And then tier three and tier four are going to be ones that have some architectural significance for tier three, but are mostly just reflective of your developmental patterns in the city, and have had some changes occur, but they may also be good candidates for local landmarking. And then your tier four are the ones that kind of represent that developmental history, but don't really retain kind of the architectural significance, may have never had that architectural significance, but are still resources that were kind of part of this overall development of Littleton Boulevard. And so this study will actually, will be a major resource for kind of our next kind of upcoming plan, kind of future efforts, which is the West Littleton Boulevard sub-area plan. This isn't going to be just a preservation plan. It is taking more of a holistic approach to looking at the corridor, utilizing land use, historic preservation, transportation, economic development, and housing. So really a lot of the various components that go into making an area successful or revitalizing an area. And the focus for historic preservation is really understanding those various approaches. Whether it's a historic district, understand a historic district like how downtown is, or is it an overlay? Is it a different understanding kind of mechanism that we can support and celebrate and maintain the character of these resources while still allowing Littleton Boulevard to evolve and meet current needs? And so one of the kind of biggest ways we are looking at doing that is really making sure that the recommendations that are in all categories enhance rather than diminish the character. That is going to take a lot of balance and understanding of kind of how to trade off being able to maintain the character versus meeting current needs. One of the biggest ones and kind of factors is this corridor was built as a car-centric corridor. You can tell by the scale of the road, the mass amount of parking lots, the just period of time of its development. And so we're going to have to really start to understand how to balance the needs as we kind of start to shift a little bit more away from cars, understanding their impacts to a community, to the environment, et cetera, looking at how we can make things maybe more comfortable for folks that aren't in cars along the corridor. So this plan is going to be a really kind of strong component of balance and a lot of public engagement that we're hoping to probably kick off in the summer. We're kind of in the RFP process right now, so I can't talk about a lot of that. We'll get in trouble, but it is moving forward and we're really excited. It involves a lot of different departments and divisions in the city. So it'll be a really kind of collaborative approach. But yeah, that is all I've got. If there's any questions, I just really love this ad for the restaurant.
Sarah, thank you so much. I want to start, sir, and I apologize for not asking you to introduce yourself earlier, but would you?
My
please
name
do
is
so?
Robert Honey. I'm a member of the Historic Preservation Commission. And I moved here, I guess, 3 years ago. I'm an architect from New York. Happy to be on the board, looking forward to trying to save these buildings and here tonight to support Sarah.
Thank you. So, and can we address questions to you as well then? So,
Sarah says, sure, yeah.
I don't know if I can answer them, but.
I have a question.
yeah, please.
What some information do you think that might enhance our appreciation for brutalism? I'm putting
you
that
saying
in the
you don't like
nicest
it?
way possible. I'm sorry, I just don't see the point in preserving those. I mean, our high schools are made like that. It really limits the sunlight within the school. I don't see how nature combines with that kind of architecture to make a pleasant space. But I'm sure there's things about it that I don't know that may help me appreciate it, so.
Yeah, oh, that's a harder one to kind of.
Or how would you
explain.
enhance it, I guess? Up there it said enhance while maintaining the character. How would you do that with brutalism?
So I think it's, I'm trying to get to that slide with don't know if I'm gonna 100% be able to answer. So I think kind of understanding a lot of,
There, that's a
that's a couple of them, yeah, and then I think.
Chase bag.
No, there are no windows in the brutalist ones.
right.
I work at Heritage.
Yeah.
You
should have had ACC up there for brutalist.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I first moved here, I thought that was a prison.
And I heard that
We
they
feel that
actually
way too.
designed their schools on purpose like prisons. Because like Fairview and Boulder, they didn't want the students to be distracted by the beauty of the Flatirons and everything around them. So on purpose, they made small windows and cut off those views. That's hard to appreciate.
It is, and I think
We just like sunlight.
one of the things to kind of understand a little bit with preservation is that there is also a component of kind of resident interest and need. I think for me, there are certain styles that probably don't prompt every single building should be saved. And so it is understanding how can these still function moving forward for folks? Is there a way to kind of shift or alter and update them to make them more usable but still highlight some of those kind of stylistic and architectural features that are important to it. And so it is also kind of a shifting, it's one of those things where we try to also sometimes preserve and understand that kind of the appreciation for style shift over time. And so originally with preservation, a lot of your Queen Anne, your kind of folk Victorian homes that we really think of, I think as like kind of historic homes, were getting scraped. People didn't like it. They thought it was too much, too kind of that gingerbread style was too much. So it's a little bit of balancing, I think, that understanding of this is an important kind of time period in how styles were changing, understanding the reason for them, et cetera, kind of being able to celebrate that, but also understanding these buildings still need to be functional. So it's not a great answer, but it's kind of an understanding of let's figure out what are those ones that are maybe more functional, more stylistically characteristic, but usable that we can celebrate. I have to say I'm a little bit biased. I do like this style. I think it's a fascinating kind of callback to kind of how we've done architecture previously. A lot of your, you look at the kind of the courthouse, the grand nature of that. This kind of calls on some of that, but being a lot more kind of simple and rectilinear. So it's kind of more understanding, letting people know this is where the style came from. These are the elements of it that we would like to preserve, but understanding we're not creating a museum. So maybe it is something about these change. Maybe we can start to kind of balance, keep some of the character, but understand the entire community hates these buildings and doesn't want to use them. That's not helpful either. A vacant building isn't great. And so it is kind of figuring out that balance and not just having one person who knows historic preservation or kind of the tenants say, yes, you absolutely need to keep it. It's you want to kind of have that connection with your residents. It's for the public good. Preservation is kind of why we understand it and why we value and say, hey, even though you own this property, we understand that it has a unique history and value for all of the community. It's a public good. And so understanding what the community wants, what it likes about its city, what its history, et cetera, that is kind of taken into account. So it is never going to be just a forced, you have to keep this because it's this exact style. How can we set it up in a way that allows for these changes to happen, us to celebrate these buildings, but still kind of move forward and understand that tiny windows, psychologically, we know probably not great to work in every day. Like it's a different, and that's the thing is like certain things
That
about
explains
buildings
a
were
lot.
chosen because of that psychological. So
So
interesting. That was not a great answer, but the answer isn't really cut and dry. Yes, save it, don't save it. Yeah,
I want to open my mind to it. I know I'm already coming in with a feeling about it. So
absolutely. And you are not the only one. A lot of people don't understand it by any means. And it definitely has like much of our past and history and kind of evolution of things, not always the best history to it. And so it is acknowledging too, like kind of who may have been supporting of this style. So it is kind of that balance. A lot of it, preservation is balance between preserving the old, still moving into the future. So I'm going to be talking about that a lot, probably.
I wanted to dovetail, you just mentioned that Littleton Boulevard isn't a museum.
Correct.
One of the things that I've heard is that what makes Littleton Boulevard so unique is it is in fact a very dynamic collection of
Mhm.
this architecture sort of all in one place. So looking at it through that lens, in a way, it is a little bit of a living museum and while perhaps no single building is remarkable and there's no grand cathedral or whatever,
Mhm.
that it is the collection that makes it so special. And so I think you already answered the question of how do you balance that, but I wanted to mostly affirm, is that correct? Did I hear correctly that that's why Littleton Boulevard is perhaps so special?
Yeah, so it is a really high concentration of these various styles. Some of the buildings do have fairly well-known architects and could maybe be individually designated, absolutely. Not all of them by any means. And it's one of the things is kind of within Colorado, it's probably one of the highest concentrations of these kind of modernist commercial buildings. And as I mentioned, a really important part of Littleton's history. But I think as you kind of mentioned, it is a scattering. It is a really kind of evolved corridor. Yes, it kind of has this umbrella of style, but happened over the course of 20, 30 years. And so there is that kind of dynamic nature to it. And so I think the goal with a corridor like Littleton Boulevard would be closer to that of saying, let's keep these resources we know we have. Let's figure out a way to kind of help celebrate those. But then understand that there are a lot of properties that may not have a super significant building or aren't really set up to be as friendly for residents. So what does that infill start to look like that is sensitive to these kind of buildings, but also sensitive then to the current needs, and kind of creating these transitions kind of throughout is one of my goals, at least with this study, is to kind of figure out a way to encourage that. And that's through not only historic preservation type ordinances, but also land use ordinances and understanding kind of, we set minimums for parking, we set setbacks, things like that. Is our current code kind of fit that? Does it make sense? And does it meet what residents kind of want to see for this corridor? So it is, to me, that kind of continuation of its history already, which is this kind of evolving corridor, has some clear identity, but it's not 100% cohesive throughout. So can we enhance the identity it has and keep it moving forward?
Board members?
Hi, so I just have one question about this plan is, you're talking about West Littleton Boulevard. Is there kind of a cutoff street that you're looking west of what?
Yeah, so it's pretty much the start kind of when how it splits and turns from Alamo and Main Street and kind of comes to, so just east of the railroad is kind of the starting point. And we're going all the way east to the city boundary on the east side of South Broadway.
Oh, okay, so it's not, I mean, so it's all of,
Basically all of.
okay.
It's-
But ending at Broadway?
Littleton downtown, however.
Mhm.
Like ending at Broadway?
We have it ending at just past Broadway because the city's limits
Like
are about a
Littleton High
couple.
School?
Yeah, so the high school will be kind of included.
Gotcha.
Knowing that that area, kind of architecturally speaking, is a bit different. So the development patterns on that side are a bit different. So I think the study will concentrate predominantly kind of Broadway to the rail, but knowing it's such a small portion, but it is still a portion, especially with the high school there and kind of connections that may be made. We wanted to include it. The north and south boundaries are not quite fully set yet. Those we knew would be a little bit more kind of nebulous once we started getting into kind of looking at some of the data and existing kind of conditions, but likely will extend at least a block north and south, but that hasn't been fully determined.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. What are some of the kind of more immediate threats that you see to these buildings right now?
Yeah, really just large changes are even being torn down. Mid-century kind of modern architecture is not as greatly appreciated. It's because a lot of us lived with it. It's kind of been part of our own history, et cetera. So you don't have quite the hindsight and separation. So I think it's making it clear to people that these styles and kind of construction is important and has value, and kind of protecting it as much as possible. But really, the biggest threat is just them getting taken down. These are not massive lots along Littleton Boulevard, but they are lots for opportunity for change. We're starting to see some change already, not necessarily resulting in kind of fully tearing down buildings, but we're seeing more development. People, downtown is fairly successful. Littleton Boulevard is 100% an extension of downtown. I mean, geographically speaking, kind of developmentally, et cetera. So we're starting to see some developmental pressure, and that's kind of why we're wanting to kind of move forward with this study to start to understand. But it's really that there's just no protections. We have no regulatory mechanism to keep anyone from tearing down these buildings. And so that's where preservation on a local level is really important. A lot of people may not realize, and if you do know this, sorry for being redundant, but your national register, kind of what we think of as designating, doesn't protect buildings. It just highlights them. It protects them from federal dollars. So like if a project was using federal money, it does go through a process. But like Arapahoe Hills, that neighborhood is not locally designated. Someone could go in, demolish every single house in there, and we couldn't really stop it as long as they weren't using federal money. So that's one of the important things too, is trying to figure out what are these kind of mechanisms that we can use at the local level to start to provide some of that protection.
Any questions? I only have 3 more.
May or may not be able to answer.
So one of the things that I think as you move into the Littleton Boulevard sub-area plan, a term that I've heard frequently, and I was just hoping you could tell us what it is and what it means, is what is an overlay district or an overlay area?
Yeah, so an overlay is kind of a regulatory mechanism that can be based in different types of uses. An overlay can be based in kind of design character. It's essentially saying you have your underlining zoning district, say for much of Littleton Boulevard, it's corridor mixed. Everything that's kind of the requirements in there still apply. And then the overlay is something that is, this area, especially kind of for Littleton Boulevard, will be recognized as unique. It still fits predominantly within this zoning district, but has unique elements to it that prompt an extra layer. And so this one may be that it is more kind of design focused in the overlay in order to kind of preserve some of that character, kind of extra kind of regulations that are placed on kind of maybe the design of infill that aren't necessarily needed in your CM down in the kind of southwestern portion of Littleton. So it's kind of an extra layer of saying this area is unique. Let's provide kind of these extra kind of protections or regulations, et cetera. I've seen it also too, probably not so much will happen here, but it's to say, in a previous place I worked, we were looking at doing overlays for kind of expanding commercial uses in a specific area to say, actually, let's go a step further. This area can handle it. We want slightly larger kind of thing. So it's one of those things that maintains the underlying zoning while adding an extra feature on top that is because of a unique circumstance with the area.
So you're assigning it basically like a special district?
Kind of, it wouldn't be classified as such, but it is that kind of concept of saying, here's this kind of extra thing for some specific reason.
So if downtown Littleton was considered a mixed, it was all like its zoning was mixed, but you wanted to say, we want to put a block around this as like a historic, so, you know, just like we're doing with downtown, we're saying it's mixed, but we're gonna put some other protections basically around that little area.
Yeah, so downtown did it slightly differently in that it is considered a historic district. And so that looks purely at kind of the design of things. And it does take into account what is allowed per the zoning code. But that one, different, called different things, similar functions of an extra set of kind of those regulations. With it being a historic district, it just has a little bit more kind of specifics as to how we review things, et cetera, that may or may not apply for something like Littleton Boulevard.
When you look at the illustrations and photographs you used in your presentation, I might suggest or argue that this era of architecture, perhaps more than others, is also defined by its landscaping, the space between the road and the building, as well as some great signs. So do those factors also play into what you'll be looking at over the next few months?
Yeah, the signs probably not quite as much, just because if a lot of the, at least the freestanding ones, aren't really existing as much anymore. It could definitely be something that could be a cool element to kind of start to maybe bring back or not. One of the things with signage is so car focused, they wanted these big flashy signs that people kind of see as they go by. Evolution of signage, we are kind of getting away from having as much signage and kind of clutter. So I'm not sure how much that'll be kind of worked in, but it is a really interesting element. Your mid-century signs are very cool. They're very large and ostentatious though. So that's kind of where we can figure that out. I think the ones that there are some that are still extant, I think they're worth keeping because as you said, they are part of this kind of character. And I think for the kind of landscaping side of things, and kind of parking lot, kind of site elements. I think that's gonna be more of that really interesting, trying to figure out what are those transitions. Cause part of like CM actually wants your setbacks to be right at the property line. And so how do you start to balance buildings maybe being here versus up at the front versus way at the back? And so that's why one thing kind of looking at the overlay or kind of potential other kind of land use mechanisms are important. So from the standpoint of the individual resources, we do look at them more than just the building. What is the property? Are there those unique elements on these properties that should also be maintained? Because they are absolutely part of the character. The car, as much as I think we would like to move away from using cars as much, was a really important element. And so when we're looking at kind of, I think, understanding the character and kind of moving between various properties, those pieces within those lots will likely be kind of part of what we're trying to maintain while still transitioning between that. So it's not just a sea of front parking lot, but understanding that this building was intentionally situated here to have this parking lot here, to have this kind of landscape or kind of features or whatever. And so it is going to be kind of moving in between those, I think, is kind of how we'll look at it. And I say a lot of this not knowing exactly what will be the outcomes. So it may not be an overlay, it could be some other mechanism, but that would be kind of the goal, is starting to understand those transitions and still celebrating those kind of landscape features while allowing for those kind of changes.
I have one more question. You said that you're currently in the RFP phase, so you can't speak. Is that RFP for consultants to help with this process?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
So knowing that it's still coming together, then my last question is, certainly I would encourage all individual commissioners to follow what city council's doing, what planning commission, et cetera. What as a body can we expect? Is there any involvement anticipated from the Arts and Culture Board throughout this process, and what might that be, and any idea on when-ish?
I don't know when specifically. We did note kind of when we put out the RFP that we have a variety of boards that we are wanting to talk to. Arts and culture is definitely one of them. I think our primary kind of groups that we'll be working with will be Historic Preservation Commission, Planning Commission, and City Council. So they'll have the most engagement. But we will absolutely, we'll have stakeholder group meetings. We understand that a lot of our boards and commissions are going to be stakeholders. Understanding that like transportation board will be important, environmental, even next gen, just really wanting to get comment from a variety of boards. I don't know when exactly it'll happen. But we do recognize that kind of, you guys are also important resources within this kind of broader engagement. So it'll be kind of a mix of commission and council, having our kind of stakeholders be a lot of the boards and commissions, as well as kind of other broader groups, and then a lot of broad residential kind of engagement. So I don't know a lot of specifics yet, but we absolutely are planning on including you guys in some capacity as much as possible.
We are the most fun of all those other groups.
Absolutely, it's great. I'm slightly partial to the HPC. It's my commission that I. But you guys have been great so far. It's been delightful. I'll take out the so far. It's been great.
Any other questions for Sarah before she leaves?
I would just say, I thought your first answer was really, you kept saying, this isn't a great answer. I thought it was a really good answer because you covered both sides of it and really dug in deep. So thanks for coming in tonight. That was really good.
Absolutely. This has been fun. I think I said this when we were standing outside, definitely consistently learning. I started last April with the city and have been slowly kind of getting the history and understandings of things. And so this actually really allowed me to kind of dig deep into Littleton Boulevard, which I think has been really helpful. And I highly recommend on our website, under the historic resources section, to take a look at this study. It has way more pictures of the buildings and explanation of the buildings, as well as a lot of that developmental history. And I left a lot out in order to kind of not completely bore y'all to tears. But yes, I highly recommend as a great resource. And then always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Do we have a way to access your deck that you have? Can you send it?
Yeah, I can email it over. Absolutely.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And I can include a link with that email too for this study to make it a little bit easier for y'all.
Sure, if you just want to send that to Anna.
Absolutely.
While we didn't get into the design elements, I found the Littleton Leadership Academy to be a great like jumpstart on Littleton history too. I think ACC takes it over now, but that was also a great case to raise the opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and Historic Littleton Inc. is another great resource way to get involved. They do walking tours, especially during the summer. It's a very low entry to membership, so that you get on their newsletters, and I think they have a Facebook page and other things. So keep that as a resource as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great.
All right. Yeah, so I think, board members, keep your eye on the plan as it moves forward over the next many months, as well as the economic development efforts that touch on, there's again, a lot going on, and we will continue to try to bring them back for your information and knowledge as appropriate, but feel free to do so on your own as well.
And we'll keep in contact with Sarah. We'll give you back updates.
Very good. The next thing then on our agenda, and mostly the last business item, is the review of the presentation for the city council study session, which is scheduled for Tuesday, April 8th, and an opportunity for us to talk a bit about what we're doing, but mostly preview the Arts and Culture Strategic Plan, Community Strategic Plan, which is different from the Arts and Culture Board Strategic Plan, correct? As we are strategic. And so we wanted to share that with you in its draft form and ask for comments, thoughts, or feedbacks as that comes together in the next couple of weeks. So Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, I can walk us through. We'll do this fairly quickly because we just wanted to give you all a sneak preview. As you'll recall, last month, the board approved Keene's Arts and Culture Community Strategic Plan. We don't have enough plans in the city, so we've got at least one more big one. And so that has been approved. So we are all focused now on the April 8th study session, as JD mentioned. I would say that every board member is encouraged to attend if you can. This is not a board update like we've had each year, and we'll probably have later this year with city council. This one is looking specifically at the plan. So generally when it's something like that, it is the board chair and the vice chair that are at the table with council, and Anna will be there as our staff representative. We will be there too. Our staff will be there as well. Council has kind of waived that in the past and sometimes asks everyone on the board to come up to the table. So that certainly could happen again this time. So wear your best outfits if you want to look good on Littleton's Channel 8.
Your name.
9 name tags are good as well. Yeah, this is a great opportunity to wear those too. So standard greeting slide with JD and Denise on there.
Do you want to go through it and then do comments, or do you want comments as we go?
Why don't we do it and maybe as we go, that way we won't miss anything as we're doubling back. The first one is just sort of a look at the board's 2024 workflow. So these are the things that we did. We hired the consultant, Keene Independent Research, completed the strategic plan by Q4. We promoted and managed the mural program. Anna's been giving regular reports on that. We made our always popular lodgers tax grant recommendations to city council, which they then voted to accept and appropriate to those grantees. We held the regular CAP meetings on the quarterly basis, and then last year was the third annual State of the Arts annual event. I should pause here and just mention, and thank you, Jenny, for the reminder. Wanted to note with sadness the passing of Sonia Ellingbo, who was she passed last month, was our inaugural Littleton Arts and Culture Award winner. JD and Denise and I were chatting about this back when she passed, and we are just all very thankful that we were able to give her that award while she was with us, and I know it meant a lot to her and to her family.
I'd be happy to share the obituary.
Oh,
if people
that'd be
would
great,
like
yeah, if you wouldn't
a
mind.
really nice review of her life.
Thanks, Anne. That'd be great.
I'd just like to reiterate, it really did mean a lot to her family. It really meant a lot.
Yeah, Cindy and I chatted a little bit after it fairly recently, and she just said that it was actually a really big deal for the family. So Nice job, board.
And it wasn't me that brought it up, it was actually Tony, so.
Oh, thank you, thank you. It was on my list and I completely forgot what to do my update, so thank you. So here is the methodology that Keen used. We'll simply walk council through this just a bit, just kind of a reminder of the touch points that Keen hit on while they were doing their fairly quick 6-month development of this plan. And I think one thing that we will mention fairly regularly throughout this process is that it is considered the number of folks that were contacted and that were involved and engaged in the process is a very robust number, and it is high enough to be scientifically viable. So a good consistent process by Keen. We won't spend a lot of time on this. I think it will be fairly fresh in most people's memory, but I think it's good just to remind them what the steps were. 5 themes that came out of this. We talked about this a bit last month. Activate existing resources, cultivate arts and culture for all of Littleton, foster the broader arts and culture ecosystem, develop and finance governance policies and procedures, plan for Littleton's future. So those are the recurring themes that we will touch on throughout this presentation and then on through the year as we go into the implementation. So here's just sort of a roadmap of how we'll be getting there. Recommendations, tactics that have been proposed. Those are the action items that are in the appendices. The actions that we'll take, interim goals. These are the goals that are to be due date 2028, and then our stretch goals by 2030. So it carries us out through the end of this decade. These are the elements that we already are working on. Some of these were in fact in process while Keen was doing this. There are things that the Arts and Culture Board has been working on, in some cases from the very beginning, but we will talk through each one of these points. I know that Denise and JD will have talking points for each of these elements. And this is just sort of a reminder that these are the things that are already going on, but they are foundational for the move forward with the rest of the plan.
And I'll draw attention both tonight and on April 8th to the percent for public art, which as a commission, we talked about a couple of years ago, brought it to council in a wide, robust way. And I think I got a little pushback. But I think we're gonna make a shot at that again and look at it in a more strategic, only public facing way, not private development, public development, and try to do that in the 2025 calendar year. So buckle up.
And that is one that will be backed by popular demand with council. I've had 2 council members who have asked me specifically whether public art is mentioned in the strategic plan. It is, and whether we will be coming back to council. I would guess that's probably going to be late summer or early fall, but Jim and I are talking about what the scheduling might be for that. But I know that is something that the council is expecting us to come back and chat with them about. So here are the things, some of the things we'll be working on in 2025 if council gives us direction to proceed. We picked out 5 of 14 items that are scheduled to kick off in 2025. You know, a lot of these elements will run through a big chunk of this strategic plan, but these are kind of the big 5 that we think will be really important to talk with council about. Promote and measure arts and culture as economic drivers. A piece of this is going to be the arts and culture economic impact study that community development is working, or economic development is working on. That's scheduled for this year as well. So we may well be partnering with our friends over at economic development. Vision for arts and culture in Littleton, and then the ongoing inventory of programming. As you know, Jenny started an excellent spreadsheet of our stakeholders. That is clearly an evergreen effort that's going to be going on, and we are always adding new members and partners to that. So that's going to be continuing. I think that's going to be a really important piece. One of the things that is called out throughout the strategic plans, I'm sure you've all noticed, is a need to really inventory what we have, and from that build our needs assessment. We've got a lot of the needs assessment that has come through this the engagement process, but we know there are more out there too. So that will be ongoing. integrate arts and culture with downtown development and businesses. I think this is a particularly nice opportunity for the board to partner with the DDA and with the city as well. So that's going to be an opportunity that we won't want to miss, particularly as council starts looking at Project Downtown. By more concrete terms than we've seen before. And then finally, developing the Visit to Littleton website. As you'll recall, we we recommend allocation every year of money in tier 3 of the lodgers tax to go to fund that website and its ongoing development. I think that's going to be one of the things we'll really be chatting with the new communications, marketing, and events director, who just started on Monday, Dennis, I think, Monday. So is brand new, but has already hit the ground running. But one of the things I think that we really need to chat with Jessica about is what we can do with that money to try to increase our bed nights at our hotels here in Littleton. That's what drives the revenue. As you all know, the revenue has not met initial projections in the first 2-year cycles. So that would be particularly critical, I think. It'd be great to add another hotel. It's hard to make that case probably to hotel developers when our occupancy rate right now is where it is. So driving those numbers up, I think, would be really key, and Visit Littleton could be a helpful source there.
And then just as an aside on these, that relates to these last 2 bullet points for your information as board members. The city is introducing a strong arts element to the criterion this year. So that's exciting, and again, hopefully something that can take a very robust and large crowd that comes to downtown Littleton annually and start to highlight the arts and the cultural element of our city as well.
What's the arts element they're adding?
I don't know a lot of details. I think it'd actually be something great to have Alexandra come back and share with us. But I just wanted to put it on your radar and your calendar if it's of interest to you.
So that's 2025. You can take a quick look. We'll spend a ton of time on this, but these are 2026 and 2027 action items. And those are ones that have come up repeatedly during the engagement piece. They are probably, well, they are clearly a little bit out there on the timeline, but they're kind of that next level of building blocks. And you can see what those are. A particular note, I think, in this category is going to be the cohesive placemaking strategy, and JD has talked a lot about that, both here in the board and externally at other meetings too. And I think that is one of the things that Littleton has talked about for quite a while and maybe made some tentative steps. This, I think, is an opportunity to really put some resources towards that and come up with a real strategy going forward. And then, of course, one thing we've heard repeatedly throughout the community engagement process is the need for some kind of venue. So the top left-hand box is examine the feasibility of renovating or building new arts and cultural spaces. That, I think, is going to be, that will be an interesting and I think challenging conversation with the community, because as we were going through the process, I think we talked about this before, there was a lot of consensus that we need some sort of a performing arts venue. There was not much consensus on what that would look like, who it would serve, and how it would serve the community. So that clearly needs more fleshing out, but we have time for that. But I think that's going to be a key piece. We did hear that over and over again throughout community engagement. And then also just to highlight the bottom right hand, we know, and we've talked about this before with the board, there are some arts and culture deserts here in Littleton, and this would be an opportunity for us to further identify those and work towards going that forward. So now we come to the goals, and this, I think, will be the piece that JD and Denise will really hit out of the park, because this is where we really justify to City Council what we may be asking for in the future. So we've got our interim goals. We picked 4 of those out. They match with some stretch goals that I think are going to be really important to focus on. These are, we picked 4. You could probably pick half a dozen others, but we thought these speak to specific needs and specific constituencies. So placemaking strategy is up there, both as an interim and a stretch. One of the things we also heard a lot from our public was the need to really collaborate with South Suburban arts and culture in our parks and trails. It's a little, it was a little bit more emphasis as to what exactly that meant, but clearly there's a sentiment in the community to do more of that. So we've got some work goals and some hopeful end results with that. Obviously, we want the city to use the Arts and Culture Community Strategic Plan as a resource for planning efforts, including Project Downtown. That I know is going to be a big conversation with council during the retreat this weekend and going forward. But that we've already started that chat with some of the players. We know that needs to be a component of that. They're receptive to it. It's just now working through the process. And then finally, the feasibility study or a venue study to repurpose, renovate, and or build new spaces. That I think we're going to learn a lot as we go through, particularly this first year and a half of implementation. But that's going to be the end goal, is to figure out what exactly the community wants, where they want it, and what they want it to be.
I think it's worth mentioning, and maybe it's on the slide. A lot of these goals are not necessarily charges just for the city. The city is a conduit and an advocate, but not necessarily the sole source of funding or anything else for these goals. This truly is a community-wide strategic plan meant to inspire and drive all of the players and stakeholders towards this vision.
Yeah, the idea of this plan was for the plan to be catalytic, to steal one of our former consultants' favorite terms that just popped into my head. But yeah, I mean, this should generate a lot of thought, a lot of conversation, and a lot of partnerships. So then we get into the piece that I know council knows is coming, but it is the conversation about how we're going to implement these things. As you know, the Arts and Culture Board does not have a budget. And that's not unusual. None of the boards or commissions have budgets, but clearly for implementation of some of these things, we're going to need some funding at some point in time as we go forward. One of the things I think it's important just to remind council of, I think they know these things, but I do think it's important to put this back on the table and remind them that we've learned some pretty big lessons from the lodger's tax after 2 years and now looking into our third cycle. Number one, revenue has not met the projections that we initially had hoped for. That's not necessarily unusual, but it is a reality that we have to deal with. Over the first 2 funding cycles, we have made cuts to tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4 of funding recommendations the board made. The council then approved and implemented. The other thing that you all know, but I think is important to reiterate with council and with our community, is clearly the need exceeds the available resources. So we don't have enough funds to come close to, even if we were meeting revenue projections, we don't have enough money to come close to what the needs are within our community in the arts and culture area. Anna and Jenny have a bet as to how many applications we're going to get this year in tier 2. It's going to be big. Sorry, yeah.
Are you gonna highlight like what the ask was versus for the last couple of years?
Yeah, and in the talking points, I think what we want to do for both year 1 and year 2 is, year 1, 32 applications, year 2, 65-ish applications, and then what that number was compared to what we had to recommend awards in. So yeah, that number only got bigger in years from year 1 to year 2. I would assume that it may do the same thing in year 3, particularly with all of the uncertainty with federal grants these days.
Oh.
So anyway, we know need exceeds revenue right now, or grant funds right now. One of the things that council said to us when we were at the meeting that JD just referenced was, I think there was interest across the board with city council in the idea of a % for a public art program and potentially other revenue streams. What they said was, we want to see what you can do with the lodger's tax. With at that point, the projection was $1 million that we had never had for arts and culture in Littleton before. Fair direction, I think. So I think over the past years, we have seen what we can do with it, and we now have a pretty good list of what we can't do with it. And some of those things are priorities of the Arts and Culture Board. Some of those things that we can't do yet are priorities of city council that they expressed to us. So we'll take those in as part of our talking points and chat about those. And then just a quick update. The projections for revenue this year remain exactly the same as what they were last year. So flat revenue, about $850,000 in gross is what the finance department is projecting, which is about 750 for us to award grant recommendations or to recommend grant recommendations to city council. So we'll simply reiterate the fact that that number has not changed so far. We are continuing to track it on a monthly basis to just see if there is a bump up. We did see across the board a bump up in sales tax revenue in January, which I think Jim said was the first growth we had seen there in about 18 months, the first plus number we'd seen in about 18 months for all those sectors. So hopefully that will happen with lodgers tax as well. But right now, the revenue projection is still very flat from same as last year. So then finally, we get to some of the things that are not funded in the strategic plan. Venue study is not a placemaking strategy that will require some development. Public art acquisition is one of the items specifically council asked us to try to see if we could do with tier 4 in the lodgers tax. We have allocated money in the first run each of the last 2 years for public art acquisition, and then had to take it off when we had to make trims because the revenue projections were lower than. Off-cycle request was another one that we talked to council about. I think that was JD's idea initially. Council then pretended that they had thought of it and we gave them credit for it.
That's right.
Joel, that's the way we handle those
I won't
things.
tell anyone.
It's a very poorly kept secret.
That was a great idea you had, Joel. Good work.
I will
Thank
note,
you, everybody.
I will note too, that while we did have public art acquisition in tier 4 of both the first rounds that ended up getting cut, it was not like there were bobbleheads in my Amazon cart. That's about what we could have covered and I had to not order them. So when we're talking about public art acquisition, we haven't even been able to come anywhere close to what a true public art program would begin to look like.
Very good point. It was, I think in each cycle year, it was $10,000, something like that. So drop in the bucket when you're talking about actual public art acquisition. And same with off-cycle requests. We know they're out there because we've seen what the need is when we look at the tier 2 grants. We have not had any of those. We haven't made anything available that we'd like to be able to address some of those. We would have liked to have added $10,000 or $15,000 to the mural program. We know that need is out there, know that interest is out there based on the applications that Anna is getting for murals. And then the arts and culture and parks and trails, that one is obviously is a partner type of effort with South Suburban. So it's probably going to be partnering on funding as well. But at this point, we don't really have any money to put towards that unless we do a special commission and go in and ask for a supplemental appropriation from city council. So these are the kind of things that are, you all know, are called out within the strategic plan. And they are things that we can't do without some level of funding. Timing on this, I think, is going to be question for each one of the items. But I think one of the things that we will try to lead council with is if they give us direction to go forward and implement this plan. JD had some great language for it when we were talking about this the other day. That we will then come back to them as part of the city's budget process. We're not asking them to make a special appropriation. We'll jump into the budget process with every other city department and put our requests before council for their consideration.
Mind if I say something there?
Yeah, please.
You guys are more engaged than the majority of people, so you may already know this, but South Suburban has elections coming up and they're gonna be forums. So to the extent that you care about their approach to art in our public spaces that, they take care of. Please, remind people that you're talking to engage with that. The participation in those elections is dismal. It is horrible.
When is the election?
Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
I mean, their whole process for doing elections is kind of garbage.
Oh,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I almost ran this year until I just realized I just don't have the time for it. But making people go there to vote, I mean, come on.
You have to ask for a mail-in ballot
Yeah.
Yeah,
They make it as hard as possible.
it sure ain't transparent. I got a lot of problems with it, but the thrust of what I'm trying to get at is it's Tuesday, May 6th.
Thank you.
Yes, I just pulled it up myself. But it's important that people actually remind their neighbors, remind the folks that you work with to participate. Because it's not only, we're here to talk about arts and culture right now, and that is crucial, but it's not just that. It's what do our parks look like? Are we, engaging in environmentally sustainable practices with our parks? Are we gonna, continue to build out essentially like parks that are focused on what people thought they wanted in the 90s?
Why are people, why
Right,
are
like-
we doing trails?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. All of these things are done largely by South Suburban. And certainly we interface within the city council, but that really matters. So if you want a South Suburban that's gonna engage more with art, if you want a South Suburban that's gonna engage in more environmentally friendly practices, this is really important. So thanks for letting me pitch that.
Well
Give it a
said.
second.
Thank
Not
you.
to mention that we give them a lot of tax money just from Littleton,
Yeah.
but a ton of their new projects are all Centennial, Lone Tree. They're focusing on those areas. So it's not gonna be art for Littleton if it carries on that direction.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you.
Oh, I have lots of things to say
I'm
about
glad
it.
you mentioned that.
He's like,
That look-
I think
look at
the number on.
You should run.
One of these days, one of
We
these
would have
days.
voted for you. We got you.
Yeah, I mean, it's obnoxious when one of the members comes into the where I golf and says, don't you guys know that I'm a board member of South Suburban? And it's just like, there's some real obnoxiousness on that board. So, sorry, that's as much as that's as much.
That's
color
okay,
as
yeah,
I'm gonna add.
I'll allow any further conversation after we adjourn if you want to talk about it one-on-one. But I want to respect the process and governance of the board body.
Or compare golf scores with Noah.
Or consent tree if you need to. That's fine.
So I think that's the last slide other than
This is a
questions.
Well, we asked for questions.
Yeah. So on that note, questions, comments, thoughts?
I was just wondering, are there other, like, do we have ideas for other revenue streams besides the lodging tax? Like, one of the first ones that comes to mind to me is I know there's a licensing. I don't exactly know how short-term rentals get taxed by the city, but it's one that I'm just curious, probably my ignorance of, is that a target? Because I feel like that's quiet lodging. Like, if you're going right to the lodging, I just don't know. I feel like there's a lot of, there's like four, I live in downtown, I live on like, Fair Circle area. And there's like four, I look at Airbnb, there's like four rentals like right there, and there are always people in them.
Great question. Short-term rentals were included in the ballot language. They aren't really policed. I know that Councilmember Peters has asked me about whether or not there's something that can be done. But that, it would essentially have to be council tightening up the language probably on that, but I know that is of interest to at least some council members.
Other than that, we talked about the percent for art. We've mentioned in the slide, the possibility of a seat tax. That would have to go onto a ballot and be considered by the voters. Probably not this year, but perhaps in a future year. And there's other funding sources alluded to in the strategic plan, including, Jenny, you shared a great example out of Boulder of encouraging patrons of the arts to give at a more increased level, be through, philanthropy study or some other public outreach efforts. So yes, there are, and they're talked about in the plans, although the first and the low hanging fruit for us, if you will, is the percent for art, just because this council has heard it and have discussed it and have given us direction on it before. So that's sort of the first step.
And I think that everything is a building block. I think it is important to remember that a percent for public art program is not going to radically change the way public art is, the ability of us to acquire public art. It is, generally it's a percent program, so 1%. I think the board in the projected policy or proposed policy was 1.5% or 2% with a 0.5% towards conservation. But it's a piece obviously of the budget for a development. In this case, would be on the public side. You can either do that installation there on the property, or you can do fee in lieu. In that case, the board would be able to do that. But it's never an enormous sum of money unless you're talking about some massive development. So it's not the kind of thing that you could plan your public art acquisition for the next couple of decades. It's also very it fluctuates widely, so it just depends on what kind of projects you're going on. So it's not anything you can really plan to, every year we're gonna have this much money coming in. So it is helpful. It's certainly a helpful tool, but it's one of the tools in the toolbox.
I have a question about the state of public art. I know that there's a subcommittee that I'm supposed to be on for public art. Are we meeting?
We meet when there's art to be acquired, or we meet when there's art to be decided on.
But
And so
we
there's
have
no-
no money, so there's nothing to talk about.
Unless there is a mural going up, so when.
Just the mural.
Right now, it's just the murals, or if there happens to be like a donation. If somebody comes along and wants to donate,
Okay.
say a sculpture to the city or something like that. Nobody has, but it has happened in the past. So, but that would be the situation in
I see.
which we would convene the subcommittee.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's no acquisition money.
My other question is with the downtown Littleton project and with the project that she's talking about in terms of Littleton Boulevard, is there a plan in the downtown Littleton project to have public art?
There is a component within Project Downtown that is, that calls out public art installations. Nothing is decided at this point, but they recognize that needs to be a piece of it. It's all, I mean, it has plenty of room for us to maneuver in.
Are we allowed to work within that space? Because it seems like the downtown Littleton project seems contained and not like that we don't have influence on that.
I think it depends on where the boundaries end up. And there's still a lot of conversation about that. And a lot of it's based on what funding is going to be available. Right now, the concentration is on Littleton Boulevard and Dennis Prince Street. Littleton Boulevard and Prince, or if I remember that right.
Or is it Rio Grande?
Is it Rio Grande?
I think it might be.
There aren't any funded parameters right now, but it's within that downtown area. And I would think that could easily include over to Alamo where your shop is.
I think I would offer you two paths. Well, really one path forward at this point, and that is take some time, Sunday afternoon, whatever, and read through both the Project Downtown plan that was adopted by City Council and the funding of which is being discussed in this weekend and then moving forward to be funded in phases. The second is to read the Littleton Downtown Development Authority Master Plan, which actually has a relatively robust public arts, although unfunded right now, portion of their master plan. So I think the first step is to be aware of those two initiatives, both of which focus on the downtown area. Again, as Littleton Boulevard comes online through this planning process, we will continue to insert ourselves respectfully but forcefully as appropriate. But once you read that material and digest it, feel free to bring it back. And we have a roundtable at every meeting, and those are wonderful opportunities to say, hey, how about this? Can we, should we, can this be on an agenda? Can we hear from, et cetera, et cetera. I love local government. We won't always be invited. So sometimes we're gonna have to invite ourselves and crash a party. But the best thing we can do, and it's why we do these presentations, is to try and get these things circulated and some base knowledge, but please absolutely go out and read more. I think what both of those plans acknowledge is that art and public art is important and crucial, although what we've seen is that it's also one of the last things funded. And so that's where our advocacy to city council and to other local stakeholders may have some opportunity for growth.
But because so much of Project Downtown is potentially, probably publicly funded, that is a pretty strong impetus for a percent program to get that in place before that starts up. That number is big.
I mean, I'll just say one more thing about public art and I'll stop talking. I don't think that it needs to be permanent acquisitions. I think many communities do rotating exhibitions of public art, just like Lafayette. I think Golden. I think makes it fresh. It gives the opportunity for artists to exhibit their work, and maybe the city acquires 1 out of 12 and they just need places to put them. So that would be my recommendation.
And South Suburban does have a relatively active rotating art as well as permanent art exhibit. The problem is they have a public art advisory committee, right? Jenny represents the city of Littleton on that body. And they have the opportunity to install usually 1 or 2 pieces a year throughout the district. So, that hits Littleton every 5 or 6 years at best when we get something new. And Hudson Gardens also has a number of pieces out there that are worth mentioning, and certainly giving credit there to South Suburban for that.
But I mean, I'm talking about like the city of Littleton. So.
Yes, but there's examples of rotating art that we can follow.
Yeah.
Well, and we do have that in the sense that we have monthly exhibitions changing out at the library. There are there's exhibitions changing out here at the museum. So there's art within public spaces throughout the city. It's whether or not it's actively advertised or recognized as public art too. So Buck Center has, they switch out artwork in the hallway.
I guess I'm
time.
thinking more of like exterior public art, like
Yeah.
on Littleton Boulevard.
Yeah, we just don't have the infrastructure to it because the vast majority of those pieces too require, if it's a sculpture, concrete pouring. And a pad of concrete can be $4,000 or $5,000 each time. So unless it's something along those lines as far as installing and taking in and taking out, some cities, that's the only public art they do. They don't do murals, they just do that. So it's finding that balance of murals, public art sculptures, and honestly, Littleton has more public art than Lone Tree and some of these other areas because we've been here longer. There's been a history of public art. So that's why, I think that's why South Suburban doesn't have focus on what's happening in Littleton, because we have our, what together for the music arts.
And I also think as we, again, and what we'll be looking for, and Councilmember Zink, this is for you, is when we present this on April 8th, I think the way that we sort of positioned ourselves to say as council, we're gonna take your polite nods or your silence as a green light to pursue this plan. They won't take any official action to adopt it. They won't vote on it. But their opportunity will, on April 8th, will be to say, wow, this is horrible. Don't do a damn thing. Go revisit it and come back. Or to say, okay, next, and move on to the next subject on the study session. And once that happens, then we can move forward. When we talk about a placemaking strategy, public art can have a significant role in that conversation as to what that looks like in developing and drafting a vision to then follow, and what we believe and what the community strategic art plan alludes to, that we can really develop what does a public art program in Littleton look like. And I'm anxious to, hopefully start to do that as early as late this year or beginning of next year, just depending on what we take on throughout the rest of the calendar. So there is an opportunity for it. It's a conversation that is just starting.
And we are hoping for a more positive response than what JD just outlined from council. I'm just saying, my expectations are much higher, I think, than JD.
It's a lot of work.
As long as it's not the no, don't do a thing. I'll take whatever response it is. But if they get out their checkbook, there we go.
I didn't say my expectations were that high, just that they were higher than.
I think the great positive that I take away from both the plan, Project Downtown, and the Chambers plan that you mentioned, is that public art is called out and recognized in both of those. And clearly that it is acknowledged that needs to be a piece of it. And I think that's big. That didn't used to necessarily be the case in Littleton and a lot of places. So that's good news for us.
Any other thoughts or questions or comments about the presentation and what specific message we deliver on behalf of the board? Well, then, again, please feel free to be there. Wear your best shirt. In case they call you up to the table.
Or your most artistic.
Most artistic shirt. Wear a big hat.
It's at what time? 5?
6:30. Are we first? We know where we are on the agenda.
We are first on the agenda, 6:30.
I think it's great. We're just getting this in front of them. There was a lot of work put, I mean, not just from Keene and from us, but from citizens. A lot of people came to meetings, they took surveys. I think that the response was powerful, and I'm really excited to bring this before council. And I think that we should be really proud of the work we've done and the things that we have on our calendar to do. So I'm excited.
All right, then. I think the last thing on our agenda is the roundtable. Before we do that, and Noah, heads up, I'm going to start with you on the roundtable, but I wanted to just acknowledge and publicly thank both Emily and Roy for their service on the Arts and Culture Commission / board. They are both rolling off, and I believe this is your last meeting. So thank you. I
Wow.
have valued your contribution and time. So
Guys, it's been a fun 3 years. 3 years. I think.
Hard to believe it went fast.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's flown by. I love working with you guys. Hopefully you reapply. I don't remember what the policy is. You have to like term out and then come back or something along those lines, but I'm sure I'll see you in another capacity.
The city council would not consider my reapplication or my application for reappointment because I was unable to schedule an interview.
Oh.
Because I was about 1,000 miles up the Amazon River learning about Brazilian arts and culture.
Oh, my goodness.
I didn't have anything else.
But it's been fun. Educational, but fun. Thank you.
Caitlin.
Okay. Roy, I think your insight, has been great. And I've always looked to you as sort of a mentor because you've had so much experience with larger organizations. So thank you.
Thanks.
And we're gonna miss you too, because you talk about education and you bring in all the things from the elementary. So we're gonna miss you too. I don't know, I'm really tired doing my job at ACC, so I'm trying to remember what this week was. We still have free workshops available for people to sign up. We have waiting lists now for most of them, but please sign up for the ones in the summer if you're interested in taking a free workshop. We're getting a big response, so that's really exciting. And there's a show right now at the main gallery. It's all the high schools in the region. So Cherry Creek, Littleton High School, LPS, Douglas County, it's the main high school show. So we just juried it and there'll be a closing reception. April, probably when we have our meeting.
That does seem to be the case.
Yeah. So all of our openings and or closings at ACC are always a Thursday. So it's probably the 10th. Yeah, that's all I can remember right now.
Your comment brought up my remembering, I don't know, it was a number of weeks ago or months. I was at Grand Junction. They have a really good art exhibits called Art on the Corner. A lot of sculptures throughout the main.
I was just up there. I had a show up there.
Yeah, so there's like on Main Street, there's a number of sculptures.
Yeah, it's cool.
For the size of the city, I was really surprised on how many sculptures they have on the streets.
Some
So,
really big ones.
yeah, very large. And I think they do rotate them, I'm assuming. I'm not for sure. I'd have to look into it again, but if you're there, you might want to take a look at it.
Nothing to report. I have one thing, because I think, Emily, thank you so much. You asked about the arts festival portion of the criterium. And it says, join us on August 2nd in downtown Littleton and shop local crafts, food, gifts, experience live art installations, and enjoy local brews, live music, and more. So that's kind of more the art component that you were wondering out for the criteria.
When is that?
That's August 2nd. I believe it's a Saturday. It's usually a Saturday.
Thank you.
And it's really fun if you've never been to the criteria. Easy.
Heritage is showing Mamma Mia this week. Here we go again.
My goodness.
Like I alluded to at the last meeting, hopefully everybody got the email distributed around that my daughter had her first piece in the Westward, which shows the 11 coolest things to do in Littleton.
Awesome.
And the museum was in it, and the library was in it, and town hall was in it. So it's cool.
Nice. I would just echo what JD and some of the members have said, Emily and Roy. On the staff side, we really enjoyed working with you, so thank you for your contributions.
So yes, I think Roy in your time has been sort of the leading voice of wisdom on the development of the arts and culture grants, and how those are considered, and that wisdom, I think, established a foundation that we will be able to build on for years. Emily, the annual arts award was your idea, and that is another legacy that I think that you're leaving behind from your tenure here. So I thank you both sincerely, and more than my thanks, I think the city of Littleton and the arts and culture stakeholders, whether they know it or not, thank you immensely. I got to see Cinderella at Littleton High School last weekend, and I will be at Mamma Mia Saturday night, so let the good times roll. There's a lot to be said for seeing high school musicals.
Oh, man.
It's a treat.
It's raw.
I believe we have mural walks coming up. Is that
Yeah, I believe so.
21st and 28th of March, I think? And I got to do the very first one a couple years ago with Michelle.
So much fun.
So much fun. I forget, they're $10 or $15. They're not expensive, but they are well worth 2 hours of your time, especially if the weather is nice. To go out and walk around the downtown area and see some of and get background on some of the murals. So I think visitlittleton.org has both of those on the calendar. And then the last thing I just wanted to draw your attention to is last night, I believe, the first draft of the Hudson Gardens Master Plan was presented to the South Suburban Parks and Recreation Board of Directors at their meeting. And so I don't know if you can go online and listen to that or find it, but that is a project funded at least in part through the 2024 lodging tax. They are a tier 1 recipient, and that was what that money was designated for. So I think it's been an interesting process. They're not done. They're going to come back and flesh it out and work towards some more things, but please feel free to try to keep up with that. And that is all. That's all I got.
I also want to say thank you, Emily and Roy. You both have been so thoughtful and asked hard questions and been engaged, and it's been a treat to work with both of you. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you not just around town, but at some of our other things that we have going on. So thank you for your service, both of you. I do have two very quick things. I have a mural success story that I think that I need to share. It is the soft opening of the Littleton Brewing Company this week. And 2 times this week, I have seen people come over and take selfies in front of the mural on Littleton Ballet Academy. So I was really excited. That happened twice this week. I don't know if they're tagging anybody in Littleton or not, but just to see them come over and take pictures, I thought was really cool. So that's a success story I wanted to share.
It looks really good.
It does look really good. And you know, when they're over there, they're staring right at the wall. So it's perfect.
What is it?
It's really good. Also, there is a Mad Hatter Tea Party coming up to support the Alice in Wonderland Ballet. It is on April 6th. It is 2 seatings and $18 a ticket, which is a steal because it is high tea. It's a 3-tier tray of treats. It's tea. There's a small performance that the girls do, and then they are putting together some games for the younger attendees. But it's not just kids that attend. We have a group of grannies that come every year to the Sugar Plum Fairy Tea. I'm sure they'll come to the Mad Hatter Tea, but tickets go fast, so they're on sale right now.
And they're on sale through?
If you go to Littleton Ballet Academy, there's a link. You just click on it and you can. But it's a fun tea. It's a really good one.
Do they do it there at the?
It's right there at the Littleton Ballet Academy. The back performance room. We decorate. There's gonna be giant mushrooms and props from the ballet. So it's really fun. And that's all I have for.
Anna, did you just answer Emily's question?
I just didn't know what the mural was of, but she
Oh.
said dancers.
Yes, ballerinas.
Yeah, it's really
It's
pretty.
beautiful.
It's a good mural. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
Besides being a little worried about how much time Denise is spending at the Littleton Brewing Company.
Site over there, so I am going to be planning accordingly.
What you
Yeah.
do, you don't believe.
If there's, Roy, anything else you wanted to?
Nope,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you all very much. We will adjourn the meeting at 8:20 something.
I was hoping it was daylight savings and it's only 7:30.
No.
Yeah, that is the case. That's, yes.
If you're interested in the